So we're going to change up the agenda just a little bit. We're going to have Matt Shipkey from the East Multnomah Soil and Water Conservation District come up and talk about some of the tools and techniques that they're using in the East Multnomah Conservation District, and a little bit more about the Farm Legacy, Land Legacy program. They're one of the leaders in Oregon, and I think we can learn a lot from what Matt's doing down there. So thank you, Matt.
So I manage our land legacy program. That's essentially our land protection program. I don't know if folks are generally familiar with soil and water conservation districts. They are an outgrowth of the Dust Bowl era, developed to provide local solutions to safeguarding, protecting soil and water resources. So why would a soil and water conservation district engage in land protection efforts? Well, one of our biggest partners is the farming community, and if that land is paved over or put to other uses, it's hard for us to collaborate and help protect those soil and water resources. So a little bit about why we're doing this work now. It's a reflection of kind of data points. It's a reflection of feedback from the agricultural community. So wish I had a pointer, but the dotted line on the south side is the Multnomah County and our district boundary. Green and blue is the extent of farmland in 1945 in our district, and blue is today. So it's a pretty stark difference, a loss of about 50,000 acres. And the ag census that came out yesterday doesn't provide any additional great feedback. So between 2012 and 2017, in Multnomah County, we lost an additional 15% of our farmland acreage, and our farmland size went down by 22%, so from 50 acres to 39. So you can see the trend. And we also have, in addition to, I'm sure here in Clackamas and Washington, probably some of the highest farmland values in the state, and we'll talk a bit more about how that creates a challenge for the future generation. John, next slide. So I think we were fortunate when we were thinking about how to tackle this program of having the benefit of folks around the country, folks like AFT, that have done this work for many years. So we weren't creating it whole cloth, and we had the opportunity to look at what worked, what didn't work. And so at a basic level, our working farmland protection program is there to help ensure high quality farmland is available to current and future farmers. Without that ag land base, there can't be a future for farming. So we do that principally through two techniques. One is outright purchase. It's our less preferred approach, but it does have merit in certain circumstances. So for example, if a property is listed for sale and is clearly at risk of being converted to a non-farm use, I'm sure you've seen listings of properties that clearly are farms, but the marketing materials are all about, this is your second home and great estate potential, et cetera. So in those instances, we can step in. We've done that in a few circumstances. Our objective generally is not to hold on to that property, but to get it back into the hands of farmers and make sure there's protections there that ensure that that farmland does stay available for and stay in active agriculture. And I think that's really the focus of my discussion here today is, and both Laura and Hannah talked on this earlier, but working farmland easements and what are they? Next slide. So I guess this is a short slide, but a working farmland easement is, I think we think of it as a little bit different from kind of a conservation easement, maybe more familiar to most people. Typically used to protect natural resources. Ag soils are certainly natural resources, but working farmland easements are really about making sure that ag resource remains available for and stays in active agriculture. So next slide. And you can go down one more, thanks. So I think Hannah covered this pretty well and Laura too, but it's this idea of a bundle of rights with the property. And extinguishing one of those bundles of rights, which is development rights. I things that maybe weren't touched on, but an easement is an iterative process. It's a dialogue between a landowner, a farmer, and the entity that's acquiring it. There's no kind of one size fits all. We have general kind of guidelines, but it's very much about what are the objectives of that landowner, that farmer, that operator. What are the resources on site, and how do we best meld those two together? So I think certainly we see the need to prevent development, because if it's paved over, that's no longer going to be available for agriculture. But I think at the district, we see there's a lot of other challenges that we really want to try to tackle too. There's just a full onslaught of things coming in agriculture today that really make it very challenging for current farmers and the next generation. We can't tackle all of them, but we're trying to get a handle on the ones that we can address. So one of the things we do in our easement is not only say that it can't be developed, but it has to stay in active production. And whether that's the owner, operator, or if unable to do that in both of those cases, then the holder of the easement can go out and find someone who is willing and able to do that. And we have folks all over the metro area that are just dying for acreage to farm. So we think that's really key. Affordability is huge. You think about a new farmer, and I think the average price of irrigated farmland in our district is, and I'm sure it's similar in Clackamas and Washington, is $20,000 an acre. How could you ever afford anything of any scale at that price, and layer your equipment and all of your other costs on top of that? So we're really trying to help address that affordability issue. One way we can do that is through putting limitations on residential opportunities on site, making it so it's less attractive to someone who's not a farmer. We can insert language that says that if there's a sale of a property in the future, it's a sale to a qualified farmer. So someone who is living on site is operating that farm, giving them that access. So not having a scenario where, it's great that we have language that says it stays in production, but it's not great if you're a farmer and you have to travel 40 miles or 20 miles or whatever it is to get to the farm to operate it. And a somewhat newer technique is layering an additional restriction there that if the property is sold in the future, it can only be sold for its agricultural value. So a lot of times farms trade at a value that is not indicative at all of what you can produce from a commodity on site. There's another market for someone who's paying a premium because they want rural estate value, seclusion, et cetera. These are all voluntary. And none of this work is arrived at without mutual agreement and without compensation. So we're a soil and water conservation district, and easements, and I think maybe Hannah touched on that, or maybe Laura, but there's a real opportunity. Or I think what Hannah said was that folks that enter into easements are much more likely to engage in sustainable practices on site. And so we are melding easements with agricultural management plans for properties. And that really varies based on the property, the resources. Some properties have riparian areas, they have streams. Some properties don't. Some properties have steep forested areas. Looking at that, looking at those resources, looking at what are the proposed cropping systems and types. So nursery, is it vegetable? Is it a fruit? Is it an orchard? Is it a sod farm? What are the proposed agricultural types? And looking at what's the way that can be done in a way that's sustainably managed, so that those soil and water resources, which are critical to the future of any agricultural operation, can be reasonably sustainably managed for the future. So a couple of things that working farmland easements are not, just to clarify, and they don't create public access unless there's an agreement specifically about that, but I think there's often a concern about them opening up the doors to the public to wander all over a farm property. That's not the case. They're not about creating wildlife preserves. They're about making sure a piece of farmland remains available and stays in agriculture. It's not about converting large areas of farmland to natural habitat. It's about creating a balance, and so where that exists, finding that balance. but it's really mostly the working farmland component of it that's driving the document. Go ahead, Jen. So why would someone do this? A big reason why, and these are some of the reasons why people might do it with us. It's going to vary based on the entity someone is working with. One thing, I've done many of these in my career. It seems seemingly one of the biggest driving motivations for folks is they care about the property, right? They want to see it safeguarded and stewarded in the future after they sell, after they move on, after they pass. And so that is that certainty that a farm remains a farm is really important to a lot of people. There's financial benefits, and so even if a farmer wants to do that, maybe they don't have the flexibility or the freedom to do that because their asset is their land. And so a cash payment can be made for a working farmland easement. There are some very attractive federal and state tax incentives. They're very complicated, but they are very, very generous. And there's also estate tax savings. And we'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute, but that estate tax savings, especially here in Oregon, where the cutoff is so low, is really potentially quite pivotal to keeping a farm in a family. So I want to talk about, I guess, two more things. One, it kind of ties into succession planning and also our farmland protection work. But I know 6-7 years ago, Laura, I remember when we started Headwaters Incubator Farm. So district property before I came on board, a former nursery that we acquired, we have repurposed as an incubator farm for new farmers. So it's a 5-year program, gives them access to land they can buy into as much or as little acreage as they want within the context of that property. Also access to equipment and access to knowledge sharing. So it's a great opportunity to do that in an area where it's really challenging to get access to land and infrastructure. But what we're finding is folks graduate and then where do they go? And so we're trying to make those connections between those new beginning farmers and established farmers that potentially are thinking about retirement, thinking about the future of a farm. So 60, 2/3, whatever it is, it's going to be an avalanche of title changes in farmland in the next 20 years. And without some guidance, we're not going to have much control over that. You have 9 months to pay your estate tax bill in Oregon, and if you can't pay it, then the state will sell the property on your behalf to pay the estate tax. So I think my point here is that think about farmland protection, think about a whole suite of tools. Farmland, farm succession planning, estate succession planning, estate planning is a key component of that. Don't forget that piece of it. That's really key. At our district, we have been partnering with Clackamas Small Business Development Center in offering 4-part workshop to farmers in our district to really help them understand what are the challenges, what are the opportunities, what's a roadmap to ensuring what you want to happen happens and not someone else deciding that for you. I guess, yeah, I think the one thing I would just emphasize that Laura did and Hannah is one thing you can do immediately is have a conversation with your legislators about the Oregon Agricultural Heritage Program and funding that in the coming budget. Now is the time to have that conversation, and that can make a meaningful difference.
Okay, time for a couple questions before we go to break here. Rich, yeah, come up here.
How many acres does Eastern Multnomah County Soil and Water Conservation District have under easement contracts?
Under easement contract?
Well, under easement.
Currently, yeah. So good question. We actually are pretty new to the business. We mostly did fee acquisition, so we took outright title to that. But we closed on our first easement transaction Monday of this week. So yay! So we now have, thank you, 54 acres, and then we have options on another 40 acres.
What is the staff's and then the board's preference between outright purchase agreements and the development rights or conservation easements?
Sure. So Laura can jump in, but I think generally we prefer the easement approach because we don't really see ourselves as, except in the case of where affordability is a question, and so where we can provide a short, midterm leases, lease to own scenarios, I think we feel it's more appropriate for the private landowner to be in ownership of farm properties. There's also the very practical reality of owning a property is a lot more expensive and time consuming for staff.
Yeah, thank you, Matt.